Part 2 of the State of the Industry podcast with Dr. Jim Higgins takes off now.
My name is Jim Higgins. I'm a professor at the University of North Dakota, John D. Odegaard School of Aerospace Sciences.
Aviation, welcome back to episode number 2 of the State of the Industry podcast with University of North Dakota's Dr. Jim Higgins. Now, if you listen to the first one, this is just going to be more of an updated version of that one. So if you haven't listened to the first one yet, I highly recommend not listening to this one and going back to the first one and then coming here, as there have been progressive updates in each one. In this episode, we're going to kind of highlight of where we are today in the industry, how coronavirus is affecting the aviation industry. He has some great insight again. He kind of talks about how he can see some positive hope in here. He can see maybe the writing on the wall of when we can get out of it, maybe kind of what can happen and what is happening. We talk anything from airlines possibly furloughing to the effects of that having on the economy, the effects of that having on the actual pilots and the airlines when the industry comes back, and how that could actually be a negative aspect of it, and how maybe furloughing isn't the best idea. We talk many more things. That's just, I'm going to keep the intro at that. This is kind of an interesting time that we find ourselves in, and one of the things we do focus on is the fact that we need to all come together as pilots. We need to all kind of just come together, respect each other, and just hope and pray for each other. I mean, this is a crazy, unprecedented time. So, Aviation, I want to go ahead and dig into this episode. One thing I'll say before we go is check out the website, aviationcoronavirusnews.com. I am updating that as fast as I can with updates. And if you want to write a blog or you want to be a writer on there, go ahead and email me, pilottopilothq@gmail.com or aviationcoronaeffects@gmail.com. I'm just looking to see kind of blog posts about how this is affecting your current job in your life. Don't speculate, just say the facts and just kind of tell your story. So, Aviation, without any further ado, here is Dr. Jim Higgins on the State of the Industry, Part 2. Yeah, it's just crazy. It's a very fluid situation. It's changing daily. And as we talked before we started recording, this is something that is kind of in the beginning. I mean, I know it just seems like the world's coming to an end, but we still are just in the beginning of this, and we're just starting to see what is going to happen, and we don't know how long it's going to last. Like we talked about.
We don't know how long it's going to last. We do know, though, there will be an end to this. We've seen it all over the world now, and some countries have handled it better than others. Hopefully, we'll be on the handling it better side, and we can get through this and move on to recovery. I have seen a couple analyst reports that have come out, and even though the consensus opinion is there'll be some pretty dramatic effects on the economy, likely a recession, although a recession typically lasts, by definition, it would have to last 2 quarters. I saw that, I think it was Goldman Sachs, they're actually calling for a pretty big rebound in the last quarter of this year. So there's some hope out there. Last time we talked, there were, it's still a very difficult situation, and we've still got a lot of pain that people are going through, especially with some of the airline closures and potential furloughs that are coming down the road. However, long term, we're still where we were 3-4 months ago, and based on what's happened in the past, we've bounced back, and can bounce back quickly, possibly as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been explained by one person that is pretty big in the financial world. He said that this is just like a rubber band being pulled down. And as soon as that rubber band is released, the market and the economy is going to shoot back up. Now, obviously, that's kind of speculation. He has experience in this, and that's what we all want to hear. But that is good to know that people are thinking that way, that this is just a momentary blip. They're not really thinking like depression type stuff. They're thinking just a recession, and that we're going to come back and be stronger than ever. And that's kind of that's got to be hard on the airlines, because they need to save money. They need to make sure that they are having as much cash in hand as possible, and furloughs coming in the mix there, or layoffs or other cuts. But they also need to make sure they're in a position in, say, 3, 4, 5 months, 6 months, that they can operate the demand that's needed. There's going to be this is going to create a pretty big bubble for when the demand does come back, if they decide to furlough people or if they decide to do other things.
And that actually is the conundrum that the airline executives find themselves in today, is the exact thing you just said. I think everyone knows there's going to be a rebound, and the fact that there's retirements, and the fact that it's just there's so much uncertainty. But the fact that there's going to presumably be a return to air travel could be pretty quick once the virus threat clears, and it will clear at some point. It'll run its course, worst case scenario, or we'll get some treatments to quickly end it. Whatever happens, though, the fear will be removed, and then what will linger are the economic effects. And if the fundamentals are strong, which they were before, you'll see that. But the airlines have to say to themselves, "Holy cow, we've got these big payrolls to meet." And, we've got 3 to 4 months here of not seeing really good bookings, but they're reading the same analysts and they're making the same forecasts and predictions as we are. And they know that there's going to be demand there at some point in the future. So, for instance, in the furlough equation, if they do furlough, there's going to be a big problem with that because not only have they lost all the money that they've invested in training those folks, when the airline comes back, we've seen historically furloughees do not necessarily return to their airline, even the mainline carriers. They find other jobs, they find other things to do. And so that could be a long-term threat that could be a problem. So the solution to me, and who knows if it works out this way, but if there are dollars that flow from Congress and the political group to the airlines, which I fully support, that might be enough to kind of hold everyone in place, at least for another month or two, and hopefully avoid any heavy furloughs. I know ALPA has been ramping up a campaign, and I'm glad to see them do that, not to forget about the workers. Not that I would ever accuse any executive of doing this, but if you were to take in some stabilization dollars from Congress, I understand there might be up to $50 billion that can flow into the various airlines. You could largely ameliorate the downturn. And if you simultaneously got rid of employees who furlough or whatnot, there could even be a point where you could do some profit taking on that. So hopefully the idea is if the money comes in, it stabilizes everything and the employees can stay employed and ride this storm out. I think that would be the best solution.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be a good solution too. I honestly do think the airline, let's be honest, so if the airline can find a way to save money and that's furloughing, they're going to choose that to save their company. Like we said, I don't think they want to do that. They know that's not a good press look. They know that doesn't vibe well with the pilot community. And as you said, when you furlough someone, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to come back. So you're going to be cut even short when that demand does come. And who knows if the furlough lasts a long time, if they get out of currency, so then you got to retrain them. And there's just so many things that go on with that. I was going to ask you, where do you think we are in the furlough equation? How close do you think that is? How much longer do you think the airlines can go? Let's say without the government bailout, without the money they're asking, is a furlough kind of inevitable, or is that still a month or a couple weeks away?
Well, without any kind of a bailout, you're going to probably see some carriers. You're starting to see some signs now with the voluntary furloughs, the unpaid leaves of absences that are being offered. And, that might be enough to, take care of it in the short term. But if we go into the summer months and we see that the airlines see that there's not a big pickup in their reservations, as they forecast out, then I think you're probably going to start seeing some of the longer term furloughing. So I do think that can happen. I think you can also see it in the short term. Of course, as you know, Compass Airlines, Trans-States Airlines, the demise happened very quickly. This catalyzed that. Very, very unfortunate. I feel very, very bad. I have lots of friends at both Compass and Trans-States, and I'm sure you do as well. And it's just really difficult to see. The hiring, though, is still fairly robust among some of the other regionals. If you look and see, there's still a lot of virtual events being held. And you're starting to see that, those Embraers that are going to go from Compass to, did you say an Envoy? I haven't read that press release.
Yeah, Compass is taking over I think they're getting 20 175s from Compass.
Okay. And someone's going to have to fly those, right? So this is where union groups can really help too. They can put in programs to help placement. And ALPA's been pretty good about that in the past, so have other unions. So hopefully we can get folks jobs that need jobs real quickly. That contraction in the regional industry with Compass and Trans-States, is as sad as it is. It in theory could help alleviate some of the cuts in other parts of the industry. Time will tell on that.
Yeah, and I do agree it is terrible, and I hate to see that. Is this a direct contribution to the coronavirus though? Because Trans-States was on its way out without the coronavirus, and Compass lost its biggest carrier, Delta, earlier last year. So I think the writing was kind of on the wall for both of those. So is it fair to say that both those closures are 100% coronavirus related? I know that Trans-States was accelerated because of coronavirus, but it seemed the writing was on the wall for both of those in the next couple of years to kind of be in the same situation.
No, the writing was definitely on the wall. There were definitely signs of big changes, and of course, with Trans-States, they had a plan to ramp down. I think over 9 months or whatever the case may be. Yeah. So you're exactly right. What this situation did is it just sped that process up, unfortunately, and of course the people that are the real victims here are the employees of that.
They are, and I'm on the same boat with you. I agree with an airline bailout, and I can see why someone would say like it's a corporation. They've done things dirty in the past, like they need to stop investing in stock buybacks and all that kind of stuff. But when they're talking about how they would rather see that go in a small business, this does affect small business because there's 700. I think the last number I saw was like 750,000 employees in the airline industry. So if we lose those, that's spending power, and that's people that we're taking their salaries from, and then there's no money going back into the economy. So this trickles back to more than just being about big business. This bailout affects small business as well.
Oh, there's absolutely no doubt, and the SBA, Small Business Administration, is actually, they've started their disaster loan process. And so even though the airlines absolutely have been affected, along with the other travel industry related groups like hotels, of course, cruise ships and whatnot, the small businesses all around the country are really being affected. There's lots of problems there. And so the access to those loans are going to be crucial. And don't forget, a lot of those companies do a lot of support for the aviation industry as well, vendors and whatnot. Yeah, absolutely.
It's all tied in together. Airlines, everything is all tied in together. It's for sure. It's unfortunately, it is something that is needed, and we don't know the effects of what all this money we're creating to throw in will have in the future. But I mean, it seems to be the necessary problem solver that we need to have right now.
Yeah. And again, I think we did learn after 9/11, there was airline stabilization money funding that was given to some airlines. There were some winners and losers in that. Not every airline that applied received that. I know that labor had some issues with how that went down because a lot of money transferred from the Treasury over to specific airlines. And there were still some pretty massive furloughs that occurred after that. So I think you're going to look for more assurances and protections there. There's some Congress people that are already kind of digging into that. And so hopefully that part gets worked out. I think everyone can agree with the loss of revenue brought upon by the government's, recommended guidelines and social distancing, which has just had a profound effect on aviation, that because of those policies, there needs to be some kind of a compensation there.
Absolutely. I think there's going to be extreme verbiage in these deals that are going to go even further in years to come. I think that there are going to be a lot of caveats to this money that they get. I don't know if it's whether they need to figure out a way to make customers happy, to focus more on customers, and to get rid of some of the fees and that we talked about in the last podcast. But there's definitely going to be some caveats for these airlines when this money does come, and it might be kind of a game changer how they operate in the future.
Yeah, it's just really going to be interesting. I know a lot of ideas are being talked about and bantered about. I do agree with you, though. The one thing we're probably not going to see is what we saw before after 9/11 is where money is just transferred and it's just, hey, good luck, stay in business. I think that you're definitely going to see a lot more in structure and, like you said, some ties and some caveats and different things that have to be completed. These could also be loans, although no one said that they're going to be loans. So they're more than likely going to be more on the grant side, which is fine. But it'll be kind of interesting to see how everything's structured.
Yeah, it definitely will, and we're going to get those answers sooner than later. It's going to be really interesting when that comes out and how that comes out. And you really wonder who all is going to be included because maybe there is enough money for everyone, but I feel like maybe there's not enough money for everyone that could be going around in the future. And we could see something happen with a certain carrier or one carrying and Yeah, we just don't know who's going to get the money, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Right. And if you look at I think it was either United or Delta, and I'm sorry, I don't have that article in front of me, but one of them mentioned that they're $2 billion down in March from
That was Delta.
Delta. Okay. Yeah. So, you look at 50 billion, it's clearly a $50 billion package is clearly going to be designed to get airlines over the hump into the summer. And, if that most of that money can be restored, plus you put in the cost savings, which every airline's going through right now, the idea is hopefully the airline will be in a perfect position to rebound. The airlines will be in perfect positions to rebound. There are airlines that right now, in my opinion, and I've read some articles in Wall Street on the analyst side, that are in better position structurally to withstand this. When you look at cash on hand, when you look at how they've conservatively managed the number of assets that they own, the liquidity, and those are the ones that you would think about that have done well in the past during these downturns. Southwest is a big one, Alaska is a big one, and JetBlue. They all have very low cost structures. Partly because of the aircraft that they fly, the way they fly it, but also their labor contracts and whatnot. And they're also managed probably a little bit more conservatively, especially when you look at Alaska, more conservatively, so that when times are good, maybe they don't expand as quickly as a lot of people would like to see them. But when times are bad, they're able to weather the storm a lot better. And Southwest and JetBlue in particular are two that did not furlough anyone during the whole 9/11 situation, which was kind of unusual as well.
Yeah, it definitely is unusual. And I also read those. And I also read one that was kind of surprising to me. It said how Spirit Airlines is actually in a better position than most people think. They said they had a decent amount of cash on hand and they don't fly too much internationally. I'm not too familiar with their routes, but they seem to be being able to weather the storm a little better than what someone might have thought in the past.
Yeah, you look at like Spirit, Frontier, and Allegiant, and some of those other carriers there that operate in that market-to-market direct route, type of grid setup. It is going to be interesting to see. You're not hearing a whole lot about that. I have heard, and it's not confirmed, but I do have a good friend over at Frontier, and he mentioned that there was an internal memo released just the other day that there's going to be a big reduction as well. They've obviously experienced a load factor reduction like everyone else has. The question is their cost structure in a position to withstand that, and with cash on hand? A lot of them, Frontier in particular, they had massive growth plans, right? Some of them are going to double in size over the next 4 to 5 years. I still think that's going to happen long term. I don't know if it's going to happen over the next 4 to 5 years. But they definitely are going to be in an interesting situation. You're not hearing as much from that segment of the industry.
No, and when I'm setting up the website, it took me a while to find anything on those three. Specifically, they seem to be keeping their cards very tight. And I mean, sometimes it's good news, sometimes it's bad news. Maybe they're holding on to that bad news. I don't know, but it does seem like they are holding on to their information really tight, especially Southwest. Southwest is not giving out much information to their employees or to anyone about what is going on or what their plan is. So I don't know if that's a good tactic or a bad tactic, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Well, it's an interesting issue as well. And I think that's a symptom of the fact that the airlines aren't quite sure exactly what's going to happen, right? I mean, they have a little bit more insight because they see the customer reservations, they see, what's happening in the future. But other than that, they're in the same boat as the rest of us. It's all going to depend on, when the virus runs its course and when people feel confident enough, and then the lingering effects of the economy. And, they don't necessarily have any more information on that part than the rest of us. And so probably that's the issue somewhat. On the other side of that too, we want to see companies communicate with their employees. Whenever there's silence for even a few days, a lot of doubt creeps in. You see that on some of the regionals, some of the regional pilot groups. If they don't hear anything for a few days during this, they're like, "Oh man, this is not good." And understandable why they would think that. On the other side of that, if a company communicates, but they don't really have anything to communicate with certainty, that can also be frustrating to employees. I mean, we're all in this together messages are very important, but they don't pay the bills in and of itself. And so employees are looking for concrete things to go forward, and it's difficult. We see that with our students as well here at UND. Everyone wants to know what should I do next? And we don't always have the best answers because we don't know what's going to happen next, right? And that's what's difficult.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult. And we kind of talked about it a little bit in the last podcast about kind of if you are a future student, we didn't necessarily verb it or word it like that, but we talked about the fact that this might create another pilot shortage bubble. This might further hurt the pilot shortage in the future because there's going to be people that are going to be turned off from flying. They're going to be turned off from their training. They're just not going to train. Maybe they don't have the money. Maybe the economic downturn will affect their pockets and they don't have the money. So this is going to go, if you are in training and you're going to be able to afford it in the future, like I would still, as of now, recommend going to it. Like we talked about earlier, this isn't going to be a forever solution. This isn't going to be a forever problem, I should say, not solution. It's going to be a time where we're going to need pilots again and the hiring will start picking up again. I've read a lot from the hiring freezes that the way they word it isn't necessarily for operations. The way they're wording it is saying that due to state or city laws and ordinances of not being able to have more than 10 people in a room or not be able to do this, they can't interview anymore. So it's not, from what I'm reading, it's not necessarily because they operationally don't want to hire. It's because of the state and local ordinances and laws.
And, we're seeing a little bit of that with, some of the major airlines and their outreach programs, their United's Aviate, Delta's Propel, FedEx's Purple Runway, and so what the airlines are doing is they're creating more of a virtual presence there as well. But my advice to younger people or people entering the industry, and it's easy for me to say, right? Because, I've been in the industry for over 20 years and I've also, grew up in a family in the industry. These events, they're tragic and they're catastrophic, but the one thing they all have in common is they're momentary. Now, right now we're in the middle of it and we're not sure when it's going to end. So to say this is momentary is difficult for some people to comprehend. But if you look at this more from a macro level and you look at it over a 40 to 45 year career that a lot of people are going to have, I think then it does become momentary. And so my advice to young people is if your dream is to fly, if you've got that passion to fly, I would absolutely still look at this as a long-term, very viable career. The market fundamentals have not changed long-term. It's just a short-term disruption, albeit a catastrophic disruption, and it's going to affect a lot of people's lives. But in terms of long-term planning, if you have the passion to fly, I would absolutely go forward and pursue that. I wouldn't think twice about it, actually.
Yeah, I would agree as well. One question that comes to mind with all this is, as you have studied things, if you have seen things, do you see a certain company or maybe a couple companies that are handling this the right way? Because, there is a right way and a wrong way to handle this, and how a company handle this right now and how they treat their employees will come to affect them in the future, where if they are the first one to furlough, if they furlough the worst, or if they just don't have any good company communication or their policies aren't very good during this, it's going to turn off pilots, and those pilots aren't going to want to either come back if they get furloughed, or they're not going to recommend this company for someone else. But have you seen any companies that are doing everything they can for the right way, sending out the right information, being communicated with, and just doing things how it should be done?
Well, I have. Let me give you a couple examples. Of course, we talked last time about the fact that there are executives and leadership teams that are taking pay cuts, which is symbolic, but it also is it's a real way to demonstrate solidarity with their employees. But here's an example to me that I was just really proud of. And again, I keep going back to Delta Airlines. All the airlines are doing great things, but one of the decisions companies had to make early on when this started becoming a reality, by early on, I'm talking a few weeks ago, is, we're going to go through hiring freezes. Everyone understood that. Companies announced that. But there were groups of pilots that had already put in notice at their regionals or their corporate places or wherever they were flying, and they were coming to Delta. And it was inside that 2-week period where you normally give notice. And so Delta decided to bring those employees on and said, you know what, we're going to bring them into trade. Even though we're in the midst of this crisis, we're going to bring them on. It's going to cost money, and who knows if there's going to be a furlough or not. But the fact that they chose to do that, because most companies did not, Justin. And so to me, that kind of thing, I think, really speaks volumes to looking out for people, because that's a real cost, and it's also an overt sign. On the other side of that, and this was a lesson we learned from the 2000s, and they're certainly run differently now. But when you look at what happened to United after 9/11, they obviously furloughed like everybody else. Then they went through a period in the mid 2000s where they called a lot of people back, but then because of the downturn, they immediately turned around and furloughed again. And so you had what were called double furloughees at United. There was a pretty good docket of double furloughees. And these are people that really had their professional lives messed with because they went back and forth several times. There was some longstanding resentment that was generated off of that. And it took a while, I think, for that to move away. United's, of course, completely changed their hiring practices, in my opinion, from what I've seen. And, I don't think something like that would ever happen. And that's also part of the conundrum when making the furlough decision that airline managements are going through right now, because if they do furlough somebody and then bring them back right away, that causes some pretty good disruption, as well in their lives. So there are companies that are doing a good job, I think. And, as long as the employees understand that no one has the answers, I think that there's some good messaging out there and some examples of that.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned Delta. They brought people on. I want to give a shout out to American Airlines because they did the same thing for a new hire class I was getting ready to start. They didn't do it for all the people they have in the hiring pool, but they did it for the select new hires that were going to start, I think, a week ago or 2 weeks ago. They brought them on. They said, I don't know if they said there's no class, but you are now officially an American Airline employee. So they did that. They gave them a seniority number. They get medical benefits. They get everything that they need. I know I think United was the first one to cancel all classes, and I know they didn't necessarily do that. And I'm not saying that's bad for United. They were kind of the first ones to take the hit and to go after this. So they didn't really know that was going to be the other reaction by the other airline. So I'm not necessarily faulting United for that. It's just interesting to see kind of the progression of who was first and how it was changed afterwards to maybe get a little better press look.
Yeah, and that's really good to hear on the American side as well. I mean, it's a big decision, and that was the key, right? If there was a class that was coming in the next 2 weeks, they've almost all inevitably given notice to their current employers, and so they would have really been in a pickle, in a real bad pickle, to try to find a job or go back. And so that's good to hear from American as well.
Yeah. How do you, I haven't looked too much into the 135-91 world. I operate in that world. So I obviously get my company's updates, which I'm not going to be sharing on any website or anything like that, just because they know it will be coming from me. So I'm not going to be doing that. But what have you heard from the 135 world, the fractionals, the smaller operators? Just have you heard anything from them at all? They've all been pretty quiet from what I've seen on the internet.
They've been pretty quiet, although I will tell you the friends that I have that operate, some of them operate as some of the bigger named fractional operators as well. They're staying fairly busy. I've anecdotally heard that in some places charter has gone up. Obviously, it's one way to kind of isolate yourself if you have the means, and if corporations have flight departments, it's a good way to start transporting people in terms of keeping people safe from viral activity. Even though you're still in a confined space, you're going to have groups of less than 10, and that is very helpful. So I have heard that. And then, of course, we do know that the 135 freight, as well as just the freight in general right now, there's been a little bit of a bump up. Amazon just announced they're going to try to hire 100,000 new employees because of the increased demand. And of course, that helps all of the on-demand freight stuff. So we'll see how that plays out as well. I haven't heard a whole lot more about that. I do think that it's possible to see some casualties there long term if the economy stays in a downturn. But time will tell there as well.
I would agree. Yeah, I imagine looking at that as kind of a short-term bump with a long-term concern. Just because if this keeps up, everything kind of follows. I posted an article on the website, Aviation, coronavirusnews.com, about FedEx, and the FedEx CEO or the FedEx head of the aviation department said how they are seeing an increase of demand right now, but he wanted to caution that by saying that FedEx typically follows the economy. So if it's a lowering economy or a downturn in the economy, FedEx will eventually follow that model as well. Now, this is obviously a different situation than we've ever been in before. So we don't know if that's going to hold true to this. And I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm just trying to make sure everyone's prepared and has the facts of what they're saying.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the way you characterize it is perfect. A short-term bump, long-term concern, something that we have to analyze. With this, we know the virus is going to run its course, whether it happens over the next 3 to 4 weeks, whether it happens 6 to 10 weeks or it goes through the end of summer. Some of the worst models show that. We know that historically these pandemics will run their course. either enough people get infected, they get immunity, or whatever the case may be. So then the next big obstacle is lingering effects on the economy. We know there's going to be effects on the economy. How quickly can we rebound? And it's a ever-changing forecast. Like I said, most in Wall Street feel that the fourth quarter of this year could be a real big bounce back. You're probably going to see Washington with lots of stimuluses. They don't. This is just an editorial. They don't seem to worry about the federal deficit as much as they used to, both parties. And of course, probably in a time like now, you don't want to worry about that as much. Maybe, I don't know. But the point is you'll probably see some intervention there as well to try to get the economic activity going. It's all about confidence. It's the same thing with the airlines. The passengers are going to return when there's confidence that they're not going to be sick or get sick. And then the economy is going to bounce back when consumers are confident that they'll have jobs and they'll make bigger purchases that take a little while to pay off. And, whatever the case may be, those are the things you look for. It's all about confidence.
It is all about confidence, and confidence is different for every individual person. I mean, you saw in the beginning of when they were announcing kind of these cuts and people are kind of starting to get afraid to fly, that maybe a new group of smaller and younger people came in and were like, well, shoot, I'll pay $100 to fly to LA from Chicago. There was the confidence level in each individual person is different. Now, how is that going to rebound in the future? Is the confidence level just going to come back immediately, like a snap of a finger? Or is it going to be gradually? I mean, I'm obviously an optimist. I'm in the industry, so I want to hope and I think that it's going to be pretty quick. But I mean, I don't know. It's just it's something that we're going to see, and it's something that the airlines and the whole world and transportation department and the government is going to have to restore confidence that, hey, it's okay to be within 6 feet of people now. Like, you're going to be okay. Social distancing is still maybe a good idea to do, but you can still go fly. Your chances of getting this now have been reduced. But like you said, that's confidence. That's up to people that get paid a lot more than us to instill that.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I do think if you look at previous pandemics, the passenger loads bounce back very quickly relative to economic downturns, where it can just take a while. But if people have the means to fly, to pay for tickets and travel, once the pandemic threat clears, they bounce back quickly. If there's lingering economic effects, then of course that's the other issue. So again, though, I just want to remind everyone the market is long term is still I would tell you is a strong industry. The airlines have really learned how to make money. Even though right now when there's not a lot of passengers, it's tough to make money. You can't. But going forward, those passengers will return. The airline has learned how to make money like they've never learned how before. And I think that I just want to remind everyone that we will bounce back, and it may take some time, but everyone that wants to be employed and is able to be employed will find a landing spot. There's just going to be some churn in the meantime, which can be very difficult, obviously.
Yeah, it is going to be difficult. And it's a time where we all, just as aviation community members or members of the community, need to just be there for each other and just be together and not try to divide. It's a time where we all just need to be understanding and understand that this is temporary, and we just need to support the companies and everything and do what we need to do to keep our employers in business and try to help and also try to be safe at the same time. One of the things I wanted to bring up that we talked about a little bit last time is just the effect that this is having internationally, not the virus itself, but the airlines internationally. We talked the last podcast about how those airlines are usually not in the same position as the airlines in the States are, how maybe they didn't have the best profits. We've seen some either park their planes completely, reduce their planes by 90%, and just really, really are affecting them. And I've seen Lufthansa come out and say that they don't know if A, they will be able to come out of this, or B, if they do, they're going to be a much smaller company than they are before. I've seen EasyJet say how if we don't get money in a couple weeks, we're going to be done. So it's what have you seen and what all have you heard about the European, Asian, Australian, African, South American markets?
So internationally, it's very different. I mean, we are seeing some positive things. Cathay Pacific's returning some of their capacity. There's new routes that are opening up out of China, that are reopening up out of China. It's still very, very small compared to the amount of carnage that has occurred on the international markets. I do think it'll be really interesting to keep our eye on how some of these larger companies like Lufthansa, for instance, are they going to have to take a bailout from, the German government, or, all throughout the world, you might see that. I don't know. No business in the world, including airlines, are designed to just burn out their cash burn and burn out their reserve capital, without having any incoming revenue for, any prolonged period of time. I mean, imagine if tomorrow somebody came out with a new desktop operating system that replaced all of Windows. I mean, and then all of a sudden Microsoft can't sell Windows or maybe 10% of what they did the month before. They're not going to be able to survive very long that way either. So it's just we're going to see how it shakes out when it comes to the international airlines. You're probably, I would say you're going to see a lot of stabilization income. You're going to see renationalization of carriers. It's going to bring up some very interesting cabotage questions, when this clears, and all of a sudden the U.S. airlines are competing against government-funded airlines. Of course, now we're going to do an airline bailout. So the foreign carriers will say, well, yeah, but you're taking money. It looks like Boeing's going to be bailed out. It's going to be a matter of degree, and you'll probably see some complications on international competitiveness from a cabotage point of view.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the nationalization. Alitalia, if I'm saying that correctly, I don't think I've ever actually said the airline in my life, but they are renationalized. So it sounds like they were nationalized, became their own company, and then they're now nationalized again. This seems to be the first one. Lufthansa might be in a position to be nationalized in the future, some other airlines as well. Is there any could you see this bailout happening where the government's like, hey, we're going to require one of you to be a nationalized airline, or do you think they're going to try to keep them separate?
Well, I think there's going to be degrees, right? I think, with Alitalia, I agree with you. It's an example of just outright, let's go back to the 80s. Government's going to take you over, unlimited resources, basically, or whatever the government has to run. Tough to compete against a carrier like that, right? Because they can operate at a loss indefinitely, basically. So that's the downside of it. Of course, obviously, the airline was probably on the verge of collapse. And so, from a GDP point of view in Italy, the government probably had no choice. My guess is you will start, once this clears, once this subsides, you will start seeing a push again to decouple. And then you're going to have other varying degrees, even in the U.S. when we have stabilization dollars sent. That now, just so everyone understands the theory behind that, the U.S. government has published guidelines, recommendations, and even in some cases some enforced quarantines locally that keeps the airlines from operating at fully competitively in the open market. So the economic theory behind stabilization dollars is to make up for government policy, not to give someone a bailout because the economy turned down or they came up with a challenge. It's just like after 9/11. The stabilization dollars were there because the airlines couldn't fly for several days, and it was designed to make up for that. Yeah. So I just want to make sure. So again, I'm obviously going to be more pro-U.S. on this, just because it's the industry I come from. So I would argue that stabilization dollars are not the same as nationalization, but you will hear those arguments from overseas.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, you definitely will. And it's like we said, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the future holds. I just got the official, someone just sent me an official document from Compass announcing that they will be shutting down in 14 days. So that is official. Compass is going to be not absorbed. Their planes will be absorbed, but the Compass as a company will be shutting down. So that is, it's official, and that's unfortunate and just sad. I mean, it's the times that we're in. Some regionals are facing these decisions, and hopefully it doesn't carry on to other legacy or major airlines as well. But that's kind of what's going on right now with those.
Yeah, it's really, really, really sorry to hear that. Like I said, I have several friends at both carriers. We have a lot of former students from UND that are at both carriers. And I know you probably have lots of friends there too.
Absolutely.
I will say this, anyone that's been faced with a layoff, my wife had a layoff from Mesaba in the mid 2000s. It's a difficult time, right? Because you start thinking, how am I going to feed my family? What's my next step? And, it can have a strong mental health impact, obviously. The good news is immediately, my advice is immediately go and apply for unemployment. You're going to be, by definition, able to get the unemployment. My guess is some of the programs the government's talking about is they're going to bolster some of these unemployment benefits. We saw that after 9/11, by the way. There were some bolstered for airline employees and other affected employees. There were some bolstered unemployment benefits. So again, it's not going to be the same as having your job flying. But the other good news is there are some regionals that are hiring. Yes, it's going to not be fun to go start over at the bottom. I mean, who wants to do that? But I mean, at least it's a job. And then also long term, the prospects for those that wanted to move on to a major are still there. Also, I think the union can do a lot of work here and help with the transition for both Compass and Trans-States. These weren't large pilot groups by any stretch, and so I think ALPA could definitely come in and maybe try to find some help negotiate some agreements like they've done in the past to help these individuals find a gainful employment elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's something that we hope to do. That's one of the reasons why the unions are there, and they're going to have to be creative, just like airlines are getting creative, just like everyone's being creative with coming together with solutions in a time like this. It's very unfortunate. Like you said, I have friends at Compass, I have friends at Trans-States, and I hate for it. Like I hate to see them like this, and I hate to think that the reality is that this could happen to more people. So I mean, it's just we just got to buckle up and get ready for what's to come. I don't know if it will get worse. I don't know if it'll get better. Like you said, it kind of depends on what's going to happen with that bailout. One rumor that people were constantly sending me and constantly asking me about is the national air system. Do you see that shutting down at all? Do you think that would even be beneficial to shut down, or what have you heard in that aspect?
Well, so I've heard the rumors too, right? And I also get emails and text messages. I have a friend that's high up in the government that is hearing that this is going to be shut down, and whatnot. We know for a fact that it has been discussed, right? Because in some press briefings, those questions were specifically asked both to the head of the infectious diseases person and also to President Trump himself. And President Trump answered with all options are on the table. The other individual said, not right now. I think it was Dr. Foss, not right now. But then they were asked if he discussed it, and he said, yes, we've discussed it. So we do know that that's possible. Where you might start seeing some interesting movement here in a sad way is if we start seeing some of the controllers. We know what happened at Midway. I heard just this morning Las Vegas had a tower controller. And there's also some rumors possibly that maybe in O'Hare as well, although that was more unconfirmed, more internet speculation. But that could cause a problem too, right? If from an air service point of view, we start getting disruptions there. Right now, I would say it's more unlikely that there's going to be a shutdown of the national airspace system. But if the numbers of new cases grow worse than projections, and if we start seeing air traffic control facilities get infected people where they get to a staffing level that's unmanageable, then you might start seeing more banter about that. But right now, today, with everything we know, I think it's a little less likely than more likely. But it's pretty close to the 50-yard line, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it is being discussed a lot. I mean, a lot of people have been like, hey, Thursday it's shutting down. Hey, Saturday it's shutting down. Hey, Friday it's shutting down. And I go ask people and they're like, no, not happening. No. But I do think it's a tool that they have in this. And I don't know how that affects anything. I don't know how that affects pay. I don't know how that affects airlines. I don't know does life go on pause for 2 weeks and no one charges anyone, no one gets paid? Like, how does that work? And what would that even look like? I don't even, like we talked about in the last podcast, the World Health Organization has come out and fully said that maybe travel bans don't have the same benefit that they think they do. We're already transporting planes with less people on them, so they're not making money. I mean, I don't know. It's just a really interesting thing that you bring up, and you bring up a good point where if you start seeing more towers or maybe en route facilities or centers getting this, then maybe the conversation is going to be brought up more, and maybe they will do something, or maybe they'll limit it. I don't know. Or maybe this is kind of to speed up the process of figuring out a way to get kind of remote controlling done, where maybe they can find a way you can log on at home and you can start giving vectors for people to land. I don't know. It's just things that are coming up to my mind right now, but I don't know what they're going to do. And like you said, it is definitely a possibility.
Well, there's absolutely been a push for remote air traffic control. Now, when a facility goes down, as you know, if it's just one facility, there's procedures in place. For instance, right now, Midway is uncontrolled. I think everyone knows that. It was a little bit of not a fun place to fly in, I understand, over the last couple of days. But recently, there's been a TFR that's been put in place. So you have to have like a squawk code. And I think the center or the local approach control is I guess probably lining people up, but it's still uncontrolled. That would not work, obviously, in a Hartsfield or an O'Hare environment. I wouldn't think. And so it's hard for me to believe it's working at Midway. But that being said, you're going to start seeing some of these procedures. But the problem is when you get too many shutdowns, that's when they'll patch together. And we'll see what happens with that long term as well. One point I want to make though is it's a glimmer of hope. And, we're seeing more and more news articles come out. I can tell you from an academic point of view, I've not in my lifetime seen science respond so quickly to an issue. I was just I haven't read an article about this, but I noticed on the NIH website where they congregate journal articles as they learn about this virus and what to do next and how it's meandering its way through the populations. There's been 1,300 journal articles that have been published since mid-January on COVID-19, which far exceeds anything I've ever seen in my life. And as a consequence, we saw the fastest ever vaccine get to trials. We're seeing new antivirals that there was a study just released the other day. It doesn't have enough effect size and it wouldn't meet FDA standards. But a small trial the other day that there's a malarial drug that seems to have some anti-malarial drug that seems to have some effect. So I think it's just a matter of time with this much science focused on solving the issue. I think it's just a matter of time before we turn the corner on this. So I just want people to know that there are some glimmers of hope out there. There's from the last time we talked, Justin, there's some better glimmers of hope than last time. There's also some more ominous things that we're talking about. One thing we do know is there will be dramatic change in the coming weeks. Some of it's not going to be positive at all, but some of it will be positive. And, like I said, we will get through it. Those of us that have gone through things like this, we always rebound and we're resilient. And you said it best, we have to take care of each other. And, at the end of the day, when we look back at this over 10, 15 years from now, we'll talk about it and say, man, that was a tough time, but we got through it. And,
a couple of alcoholic drinks will be drank during those conversations. You're like, man, we survived that.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is definitely, what do you think? Like, we kind of touch on it a little bit, but do you think this will change how airlines operate in the future? Do you think they're going to have more of a rainy day fund? Do you think that this will completely stop the stock buybacks? Or do you think they're going to try to have more cash on hand? Maybe they're going to do everything they can to see, because this is obviously the first time in this day and age where we have air travel like we do, where we have a industry like this that can be so affected so quickly with, like you said, a company can't operate with no income for a long period of time. So do you see maybe a total shift in how airlines are going to operate from here on out?
Well, certainly for the next 3 to 5 years, you'll see things much more conservatively run. That's just the nature of management. Lessons learned. Long term, that remains to be seen. But certainly the three big categories of, when you're bringing in good revenue, there's three big areas. There's dividend payback to the shareholders, which is nice to do, right? Excuse me. When you take your shareholders and reward them for investing in your company, shareholders like that. And so that's nice to do, but that's something that doesn't have to be done at all. And I think you're not going to see a lot of dividend payouts. Employee bonuses, excuse me, sorry, including management. You're going to see that reduced as well. When you look at places like Delta and others, there's some pretty massive bonuses paid out over the last several years, which is a great thing. But you're probably not going to see that done for a while, unless things really return to profitability. And of course, the stock buybacks, which you talk about as well. These are all nice to do things, but companies have learned a lot about their own liquidity, in recent weeks, and those lessons will be felt for, like I said, the next 3 to 5 years for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's going to be probably 3 to 5 years, maybe a couple more after that, where they don't do that kind of stuff there. Like this is where it's so fresh, and once it kind of wears off and the memory kind of fades a little bit, maybe they'll start getting back into what they're doing. Now, we don't know what the bailout or what they receive will kind of induce with them. Maybe there'll be rules where they can't do that, or maybe they can only do it to a certain limit, because obviously people investing like those stock buybacks, the company likes stock buybacks. So there's going to be, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. One question that I was going to ask before we kind of get into some of the questions that were asked, and won't keep you for too much longer. What do you, like, your professional opinion, what you've been seeing, I know it's kind of impossible to really kind of predict, but how long and when do you think it's going to get better? When do you think we're going to be in the worst of it? Are we in the worst of it now, or is it still the beginning? Kind of what's your vibe on the situation?
Well, if people follow the CDC guidelines more or less, I think that will make a big difference. We're certainly seeing that. So there's been several different projections out there. Both the U.S. Surgeon General and Dr. Faust, the head of the infectious diseases office, U.S., both of them are saying that they're positive that the things that we've done are having an effect. We're not necessarily seeing that right now with the new cases being produced because, there's a 5 to 12 day incubation period, right? So the decisions we make today, it's going to take between 5 and 12 days to see any kind of an impact. But when you model these out, even worst case scenario, let's say nobody washes their hands and, there's no social distancing in what case, assuming that the seasonality, the weather doesn't affect this, which it does other coronaviruses in some cases it doesn't, so they're not sure. Then this could easily run through the end of summer. And I think that's probably the worst case scenario with, of course, a resurgence next year. That resurgence next year, though, if it becomes endemic, the resurgence next year, we're going to be in a much better position by then to handle it. So I don't think it'll be as bad next year. The uncertainty won't be as well known. That's worst case scenario. Best case scenario, some of the projections I'm seeing show us if we follow Italy and Iran and some of the other places, you're looking at the first week in April where we get kind of our apex of cases, somewhere between the 40 and 50,000 cases in the U.S. That's probably best case scenario. And then we start trending down like all the other countries have done. China right now, I don't know, just today or yesterday announced they no longer are having new infections. The only infections they're getting are people that are traveling back into the country. So if we can get to that point, probably by mid-April, where we get down to the bottom half of the curve, you could probably start seeing things relax a little bit and opened up. We do have to guard against a second spike. Of course, this can all change if the antivirals that we're hearing about work and they can be produced in mass quantity, which I understand the U.S. drug companies have already tooled up. And then the only other obstacle we have to navigate is the oversaturation of the healthcare system in the U.S. Even at 50,000 people, if not more, that's going to really tax a lot of communities and their healthcare. So those are the things we have to get through. But there's signs of hope out there. Other countries have done it. There's no reason why we can't do the same thing.
Agreed. And the good news, hopefully, it's all good news. Like you said, it's kind of speculation. We really don't know, but there is kind of a timeline in place, and there is kind of a mini case study based on other countries and what they're doing and when they peaked and how we peaked. And they base that off of what we know when we knew it. So it's definitely going to be, it's going to be telling in the next couple of weeks of what timeline we are on and what the effect will have.
No doubt about it. It has changed everyone's way of life for sure. We've all felt that. And I know everyone wants to get back to normalcy, and we will. We'll absolutely get back to normalcy. My guess is there might be some positive lingering effects, maybe the hygiene and some of the different things, people covering their mouths, whatever when they cough. Hopefully that'll have a long-lasting effect, right? That would be great.
I know, right? If everyone could just wash their hands now. I'm sure everyone's tired of being told that, but yeah.
Right.
And my hands are tired of being washed. They're all scaly and dry now. I feel like they're about to burst.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way.
Yeah.
I bet lotion stocks will be going up.
I know, right? Yeah, next is lotion. There's going to be a lotion shortage.
Right.
All right. Well, I asked some questions, like I said, on my Instagram at Pilot to Pilot. Most of them were very similar. Most of them we kind of already talked about. It was kind of just like, I'm 17. What should someone do my age? Keep in mind moving forward. And we kind of mentioned that it's still a good idea to want to be a pilot. It's still an industry and a career that you should want to have. Just kind of understand that this is one of the side effects of this career, that it almost seems now every 10 years or so, there seems to be some kind of major blip that can affect your job and can affect training and can affect everything. So I think just as long as you are okay with these kind of major stressors that can happen on you and on the industry, then I think you should continue it. What do you think?
I think that's really good advice. If you have a passion to fly, and that's really what it takes. And we know, what I'm talking about, Justin. You just have to have that passion to want to fly, to have your office be the North Atlantic, right? You look out the window and see that, stuff like that you just can't replace. And so if that's what somebody wants to do, they should absolutely continue towards this career. There's going to be great opportunities long term. You're absolutely right. We will on occasion see these situations. I will tell you, I think they're fewer than farther between. Had we gone through a regular recession, I think the airlines were very well set up to handle that, unlike before. And of course, it takes something like this to really cause a disruption. And I just don't, I would hope that this is just something you don't see very often in one's life. So I think long term, it's a great career. Make sure you're getting into it for the right reasons. Every now and then we get somebody that thinks they're going to make a ton of money. And I mean, we certainly know that there's great jobs out there, rewarding jobs out there. But anecdotally, I'll tell you that sometimes when I see somebody motivated, not by the passion of flying, but, more by, I think I can make a ton of money and this is a great career, sounds cool. It doesn't always work out quite as well.
No, 100% agree. And that's something I preach for a while, is make sure you're in it for the right reason. So I agree with you there. Yeah. One someone asked, it was kind of, how will this affect student pilots and CFIs and maybe people that are trying to train right now, or maybe people that are trying to apply? Do you see this kind of, I know we mentioned this briefly. We talked about how we think hiring will pick back up kind of immediately once it stops. But do you think that this is is there a chance that this could maybe keep CFIs as CFIs for longer than they wanted to be?
I think temporarily that probably will happen. I mean, I know that a lot of CFIs, especially at a lot of the colleges in the U.S., were just counting their hours down until they got to their 1,000 for the restricted ATP to move on. And there's definitely going to be a delay in a lot of that. Although the regionals, like I said, there's still a lot of hiring going on there. But I think that you'll definitely see some type of a delay there. From an instructor point of view, we have seen shortages all across the U.S., in particular the CFIs who can teach CFIs, and then the MEIs. So those are where we really saw some real massive shortages. And, so hopefully, if anything, if there's a little bit of a lull in the hiring for a while, from a perspective of a flight school, you might temporarily see some of those instructors that can help with some of those more advanced students stick around a little bit longer. There are a lot of flight instructors right now that are hurting because they're hourly employees for the most part, and there's not a lot of flying going on at all around the country. And, they're going to be going without big paychecks for a while. I know at UND, a decision was made to figure out how to still pay the hourly employees and figure out what they would have made had we not suspended. By the way, we ended up suspending our flying until April 6th up here. I know a lot of other flight schools have as well. And you don't want to lose those flight instructors. You don't want them to leave and, go someplace else. And they're critical shortage. So that's all trying to be managed as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I didn't know you guys canceled flying and other flight schools as well. That was going to be another question. It was, do you know if any flight schools have a coronavirus, I was going to say COVID-19, but coronavirus policy? And obviously you're saying that some flight schools have canceled. I'm sure they are taking other precautions as well. One question I had about, we talked about 135 and 91 fractionals, how they're handling it, but specifically they're asked, how do you see EAS, Essential Air Service carriers, being affected during this?
Well, EAS is always been kind of a speculative area, but I actually think I actually think part of this airline stabilization stimulus package, I think that one thing senators and Congress people really, really like is they like when they can go to a local community and say, hey, we got an EAS contract here and we're going to put service into this community. And so I actually think that there could be an upside for EAS and all of this. We'll have to examine the stabilization money that comes down. I certainly don't see a reduction in it at all. Still, though, a lot of people that fly EAS routes, they know this. Even though a company may be on an EAS route, it doesn't mean it's a profitable route for that company by any stretch. There still has to be passengers that bring it over from marginally increased to positive. So we still have to see those passengers return. But I do think that from the standpoint of policy, that EAS, if anything, might be bolstered a little bit with the legislation that comes out.
No, yeah, I definitely agree. You said it perfectly there. Last question, and this can be the last question we kind of ended on. It is, what are the positives? We talked about this a little bit, but it might be nice just to to get all the positives at the end and leave on a high note. But there's so much negative news right now. Everything is negative. What are the positives that we can look at during this virus debacle and the bleak outlook currently? What can we kind of hold on to of the fact? I know there's one is that this will change. I mean, like we said before, the resiliency is there. The airlines and the aviation industry has gotten through stuff like this before. This might be one of the worst things they face, but historically we have gotten through it. So I think that's one of the good things to hold on to, is just hold on to how we have in the past performed. I know you have said other things as well, but I'll give it to you to kind of end it with some positive things that you see.
Well, I do think there's some positive pieces. We do know that this virus will run its cycle. It'll either happen quickly or will take a while, but we do know the industry will rebound. There's definitely some good news out there. We've seen science come together like we've never seen it come together. Local communities have come together like they've never come together. And pilots, I think, are coming together as well when you look at some of the different groups out there. We are all in this together, and we'll all get through it together. There's just no doubt about that. I just have absolutely no doubt about that. Help's on the way with the stabilization money, and with a little bit of good luck and some fortuitous decision-making by both our managements and our government, we can get through this without any much more disruption. Again, hearts go out to Compass and Trans-States. Hopefully that's the extent of this, and I do think there's reason for hope.
Yeah, I would agree. Dr. Jim Higgins, thank you so much for coming on again. I know we just talked, 4 days ago, so maybe we'll be having you on again in a short time. I was supposed to go back to work on Saturday. I'll be gone for 6 days, so won't really be able to podcast from there, but I'll be in touch with you and try to provide your updates to everyone that's listening now. So if you want to say anything more, just let me know, and we'll keep going from there. But thank you so much again for coming on the podcast and sharing what you know. It's very much appreciated.
Well, thanks for having me, Justin, and I'm happy to come back anytime.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thanks. You too.
And that is a wrap of episode 2 of the State of the Industry podcast with Dr. Jim Higgins from the University of North Dakota. Thank you, Aviation, for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can email me, pilotthepilothq@gmail.com. Check out the website, aviationcoronanews.com. It's the most up-to-date information about how the virus is affecting our industry. Please leave us a review on iTunes, and you can just find us there. You can search Pilot the Pilot. If you listen to this, just drop a review. That helps this podcast get noticed and helps other people listen to the podcast as well. Aviation, that's all I have for you guys today. Stay safe, wash your hands, and happy flying.